Bonjour, comment ça va? Ça va bien? Peu fatigué? Peu faim? C'est presque déjeuner? Je vais être proche, t'inquiète pas. C'est un plaisir d'être ici, d'être en France, mais c'est un peu bizarre, hein? Il y a beaucoup de gens ici. Mais c'est un plaisir. Okay, I've fucked with the English speakers enough. Hi, everybody. So, I would like you to close your eyes and imagine a penguin. Really see the penguin. How big is the penguin? What is the penguin doing? And who are you in relation to the penguin? Okay, open your eyes, but keep the penguin in your thoughts. I have some important questions. So the first one is, do you want to hug the penguin? Does anybody want to hug the penguin? Okay, cool. We should be friends later. Find me. Who would run screaming from the penguin? Anybody? You look like you would like to run screaming from... No, you're not ready to admit it? It's okay. All right. So the rest of you are like somewhere in between, right? So there's a variety of opinions on hugging the penguin. And you know why that is? Because there is a wide variety of penguins, right? So fairy, little blue penguins, they're like 30 centimeters tall, you know? And like, I'm not an animal expert, and this is not advice, and you know, consent is important, so see if the penguin seems open to it, but like, absolutely hug that penguin, right? And then the largest penguin was in prehistoric times, so like even before waterfall development was a thing, and that penguin was like the size and weight of a human being, you know? And like, again, you do you. I want you all to live your best lives, but I don't think maybe hugging that penguin should maybe not be your first move. You know what I mean? Okay, so what do penguins have to do with process? You all think I'm mad? I think I'm mad and bilingual at this point, which is like exactly what I'm going for, so don't worry. But here's why I tell you that I'm going to use the word penguin and process pretty much interchangeably in this talk, you know? And so now it makes sense, right? Because we've all been there. We're like offering up a penguin, and it's like a little fairy penguin. It absolutely would be a good pet, and like take it home, keep it in your bathtub. Don't we all need new hobbies in this timeline? And somebody's like running, screaming like it's a giant prehistoric penguin from the before times, you know? And you're like, no, like, look, it's just a penguin, you know? And they're like, oh my God, it's a penguin, it's a penguin. And you're just like, so this is a talk about reconciling the penguins. So how many of you are in leadership roles? Yeah? Cool. Great. And how many of you are ICs? Amazing. Cool. So how many of you have wanted to change something about the way that your team works? All right. All of you. And how many of you have succeeded? Not quite all of you. Okay. So I wrote this talk initially for managers, but like process is not exclusively the domain of management. If you want your team to change, then this talk should help give you some ways to create that change. And if you're frustrated the way that process happens in your organization, then this talk should give you some context for why and help you better engage with it. So why do people react so differently to process? One big variable there is how people respond to expectations. And there's this framework by Gretchen Rubin called the 4 Tendencies, which I really love. And there's a quiz that you can take online, but I'll just give you a quick overview. So first up, the difference between inner expectations and outer expectations. So inner expectations are the things that I expect of myself, and outer expectations are the things that other people expect of me. Now, this penguin is clearly an upholder. Notice its upright position. So this penguin is meeting their own expectations and other people's. And this, notice the critical expression, is a questioner penguin. Now the questioner penguin interrogates all expectations and meets only the expectations that make sense to them. This penguin is an obliger. You can just see, you know, the way that they're looking for somebody else to tell them what to do. And they meet other people's expectations, but they have a hard time meeting their own expectations. And finally, this penguin is clearly a rebel. And they are just resisting all expectations. So if you've ever wondered why some people have like elaborate strategies to do things that are very easy for you, anybody here wondered that? Any exercise instructors in the house? You're probably an upholder. If you love spreadsheets, does anybody love spreadsheets? I love a good spreadsheet. Then you're probably a questioner. If you ever feel really resentful that you're doing everything that everybody else wants and nothing for yourself, well, you're probably an obliger or possibly just a woman living in the patriarchy. And if you just want to be free, like those are the people that left already. You're probably not in a talk about process, but you could be a rebel. So why is this relevant? Well, when we're trying to create change, and process is a form of change, we need to get other people to adopt it. And your process is in some way an expectation that you need to give to other people. And this is a really helpful framework to understand how people can and will react to it. So obligers are pretty easy to give process to until they rebel, which I'll leave out today. Upholders are a little bit more critical, but if it doesn't conflict with some other expectation, then they'll probably go with it. And questioners might adopt your process, but you will first need to satisfactorily answer all their questions. And rebels are almost certainly going to resist your process, but don't take it personally because rebels resist everything. Now, like engineering managers, penguins have a variety of ways to go faster, right? So on land, they toboggan, so this is when they slide on their front. And in the water, they porpoise, so they jump up and down. And they also have this thing that they do, which is great for meeting the last milestone in a sprint, which is they release all the oxygen from their feathers, and it reduces drag and gives them a very short, sharp burst of speed to escape a predator. And engineering managers, we have process. But what even is process anyway? So I found this definition in Merriam-Webster, which I'm going to awkwardly read to you. Process is to subject or handle through an established, usually routine set of procedures. What does this mean? Process is how we get things done in a consistent way. So when I'm thinking about organizational change, I think about three characteristics of process. Process as an agreement about how we work, process as a way to answer questions, and process as culture. Now, when penguin chicks hatch, they're super cute. Have you seen them? They're all fluffy. Yeah, but they're not waterproof, so they have to stay out of the ocean until they shed the down and they get their proper, professional penguin look. And processes that function as an agreement about how we work help people know what they can expect from each other, or in general, whether it's time for a baby penguin to swim in the ocean. So, for example, we might agree that we're doing code review in a certain way, using Git flow, releasing every other Thursday. We might have agreements for what topics get covered in meetings and what can be asynchronous. We might have a process for how we approach taking vacation, where we report it and how. And in large organizations, that agreement is often enforced by more and more arduous processes. But in a small organization, often it's enough to just state the agreement and have people adhere to it. Every penguin has a distinct call, which allows them to recognize their mate or chick in large groups. And processes that function as ways to answer questions often center around documenting and retrieving state. So, the way that this distinct call answers the penguin's question of where is my chick or where is my penguin partner. So, for example, we might commit to certain formats around project updates. We might use tags to indicate the status of an issue. We might have a shared talent calendar to share important team events. And as organizations grow, there's more and more value to being able to consistently answer the question, who is working on that? How is this going? When might we expect it to be done? But particularly interesting to me are processes that answer questions that might otherwise not get asked. So office hours, for example, are an answer to the question of when can I talk to this person? Penguins lost their ability to fly millions of years ago, but they are the deepest diving and fastest swimming of any bird. And much like in the way that evolution accentuates certain characteristics and eliminates others, processes that determine the culture often reinforce or undermine an organization's stated values. It might be how you structure meetings to make sure that everybody talks, or not, or how a performance cycle promotes and supports a growth mindset and continuous improvement, or not, or processes that treat emergencies as emergencies and try to reduce them, versus processes that reinforce a hero culture. In the end, many processes touch all of these aspects, and all of these aspects can help create buy-in. A process often gets sold based on the ideal value it creates, and it gets resisted based on the perceived overhead. But agreement and adherence typically start by agreeing the problem to solve. So maybe you think this makes sense. Maybe you just really like penguins, in which case you're welcome. But that's really like proving an algorithm versus running it in practice. So let's talk about how this applies to some real examples of cultural and process change. I once took over a team that was really struggling. This, by the way, is my favorite penguin in these slides. Maybe my second, maybe my third. Anyway, I love this penguin. But anyway, so I took over this team that was just like not really functioning very well. And to my dismay, one of the issues that quickly became apparent to me was that I could not consistently expect people to show up for work. Fun times. So there was a really high expectation of autonomy. There was no real training of managers. There was an absence of typical norms or HR processes. And there were like multiple root causes of this problem. But one of them was that people were often so isolated that it seemed like nobody cared if they were making progress or not. And if they got discouraged, it would just take them longer and longer to come online the next day. One of the most impactful processes that we put in was asking people to do a daily stand-up. In text, at the start of their day, super lightweight, but it made the agreement that people show up to work each day more concrete. It's like you have to come and post at least one message in this channel. And, you know, it was obvious if they didn't. It answered the obvious question of what are you doing today and what did you do yesterday, but it also created insight into the question of, is this person stuck? And it was the start of shifting the culture to one where people communicated with each other more and helped each other more proactively. Now, of course, there was the expected pushback from people who just did not want accountability, but the most interesting pushback came from people who had high intrinsic motivation and high self-esteem. Those people, they knew what they wanted to get done, and every given day, they showed up, did it, and if they got stuck, they had people they could turn to. So to them, this penguin was just like an unnecessary overhead, and they did not want to deal with it. And this is fair, right? It's reasonable that people who are generally effective are resistant to processes that are designed to highlight and address ineffectiveness. But outlining the desired cultural norms beyond the process was much more compelling to them than the process itself, and it helped create buy-in. The value of this process was really in being a foundational change in team communication that allowed many more impactful changes to come over time. Now, I spent 2019 leading a developer experience team, but we all make mistakes, right? And the main focus of the team at the time was to scale up hiring to hire 100 people a year. So in 2018, the company had hired 30 people. So 100 was a big jump, but functionally, that number was irrelevant because everybody who'd been working on hiring had got burnt out and noped out on it. So we were just starting from nothing. We had a hiring process that was minimally documented, that relied too much on individuals who just dropped out because they were burnt out or resentful. So in Q1 of that year, we managed to hire just 8 people. Every conversation with my boss was so fun, let me tell you. But by Q3, we were consistently hiring 25. I had a spreadsheet. I was like, no, look at my spreadsheet. I have a plan. He did not give a fuck about the spreadsheet. Anyway, so by Q3, we were consistently hiring 25. And yes, my spreadsheet was very key to this change. But what changed? So much process. Oh my God, if we had a proportionate number of penguins, we could save at least one of the 13 endangered subspecies. Now, originally the agreement, which just wasn't sustainable, was for a few people to do a lot. And we changed that for a lot of people, ideally everyone, to do a little. And this improved so much. By making the work more manageable, we increased engagement and enjoyment. And by removing one-on-one dependencies, we were able to eliminate bottlenecks and dramatically reduce time and process. Anything incoming got allocated to somebody with availability, whether it was an interviewer or a code test or whatever, it all went into a pool. And we removed the ambiguity. So instead of intense one-on-one training, we adopted consistent rubrics throughout, and we calibrated people against them. And every interview covered the same points, every code test evaluated the same things, and this changed the question of what did you think to how does this interview or submission evaluate against the rubric, which is a much, much easier question for people to answer. Even better, this reduced subjectivity, making the process more fair and consistent and improving confidence in the evaluation. And we shifted the culture to make it clear that this work was visible and valued. We provided ongoing training and calibration. We created review groups made up of people who were particularly great at interviewing or reviewing code tests. And we worked really hard to make sure that people knew their work was appreciated. We credited people involved in any new hire. We sent out little thank you tokens every quarter, from custom swag to handwritten thank you cards. And this example is one big process with many sub-processes, but the individual details of them are not that interesting. What was interesting was the North Star of a scaled and sustainable process, and the core idea of many people, ideally everybody, doing a little. Tying all the sub-processes back to this and ensuring that they supported it was absolutely key. And when I consider the missteps that we made, the majority of them stemmed from forgetting that this North Star and being reactive or just succumbing to pressure. Now, sometimes I've been lucky enough to take over teams that don't have huge and pressing problems. And this is invariably much less stressful, but one of the problems I run into there is those teams are even more resistant to process, because they're but everything's fine, what are you gonna do? It's oh, you have a new manager now, and they're no, process, penguin! So, yeah, firstly, how do we even know how a team is doing, right? We don't. It's much easier to measure progress than state, but that's an entirely other talk. And when I want to get teams out of this defensive mindset, I use the concept of experiments. So team experiments are things that we try to improve the team dynamics or effectiveness, but the experiments themselves are a process. We track them, we review them, and we iterate on them. Now, the concept of experiments frames the agreement about process, that we will try things and iterate, and that nothing has to be perfect, nothing will be perfect, and nothing is set in stone. And the process question is reframed as what could we try? It's much less threatening. And experiments support a mindset of continuous improvement and openness to try new things. And so over time, this mindset shifts the culture of the team. Now, one of the places that we've conducted a lot of experiments on my current team is our onboarding process. It was just clear when I joined that we weren't onboarding people very well, we were non-boarding them. And so now each new person we hire, we try to make it a little bit better than it was for the person before. So we ask every new hire to conduct an experiment on the next new hire where they try something that they think would have helped them. And this has included things like one-on-ones with everybody on the team, having a welcome event, collecting bits of advice for people on the team for the new hire. But the best shift has been the mindset, because now the team views onboarding as a collective responsibility. They've all contributed to it in one way or another. Real change is both individual and systematic. Process change systems, but shifts in mindset change individuals. Addressing both together is key to creating meaningful organizational change. It doesn't really matter what processes you enact if people don't believe in them. And any mindset you create will be really short-lived if it's undermined by the processes of your organization. So when you're approaching something that looks like a process problem, I'd encourage you to ask yourself 3 questions. What is the desired culture? Where is the ambiguity? And how do we want to work together? Constructing a narrative around identity can appeal to the rebels, and clarifying ambiguity can be a way to connect to the questioners. And more consistent agreements about how we work together help both obligers and upholders, because it helps them know what's expected of them and what they can expect from other people. And lately, I've been on this kick of combat Zoom fatigue by deleting your boring meetings. Because, going to meetings might be part of your job, but it's no one's job to go to meetings. And process is similar, right? Creating process might be part of your job, but it is not your job to create or enforce process. When you stay focused on the outcomes and you create buy-in, process is the least interesting part of the change that you create. So I really hope that this will help you give your teams more huggable penguins. So thank you. Good luck. Tweet at me and let me know how you go.